Good evening and welcome to this digitally enabled online meeting of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth, held on Monday, October 26, 2020. I'm Mayor Todd Kasenberg and I'll call this meeting to order. I ask the Deputy Clerk to note our starting time for the minutes as 7 p.m. Today's meeting is being streamed live on the Municipality of North Perth YouTube channel and will be available there after the meeting as an archived video. Anyone who is invited to speak will be recorded and their voice, image, and comments will form part of the live stream. The chair and the clerk have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination or interruption of live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances where deemed relevant. Circumstances may include instances where the content of the debate is considered misleading, defamatory, or potentially inappropriate to be published. Thank you. Welcome to those who are joining us via the YouTube channels. Welcome to councillors and staff and delegate who will participate in this meeting tonight. Of course, I invite your decorum, as is always requested by those sitting in such chairs. I don't believe, or do we have any councillors who are absent at this hour? We have all councillors with us, thank you. So that allows us to move forward. Let us move to item 2.1 of our agenda pertaining to pecuniary interest. For the benefit of those unfamiliar with council practices, provincial legislation requires councillors with a potential pecuniary or financial interest in any item at the council table to declare this interest and to remove her or himself from discussions and voting on the item. Sometimes this can even apply to previous meetings. In accordance with recommended protocol at this time, I invite all councillors with pecuniary interest, including those who have declared in writing, to verbally advise the chair in public session and to submit documentation to this effect to the clerk in writing. Councillors are further reminded that should a potential conflict be perceived during the meeting, they may so declare and act at any point in the meeting. Councillors, I'll open the floor to you. I believe Councillor Duncan wishes to address council on this. Councillor Duncan.
Hi, everyone. I need to declare a conflict from the previous October 19th meeting on item 5.2.4, as well as 13.1, the confirmatory bylaw, as the item had the potential to financially impact my business. So therefore, I declare a conflict on that item as I wasn't in attendance at last week's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Are there any other councillors who wish to declare pertaining to either last or this meeting? Any indication of that? Okay, so let's move forward then. I'll explain our virtual processes. Tonight, I'll be systematically trying to seek consent from various councillors as movers and seconders of the various resolutions and bylaws that will be put before us. I will do this to some degree alphabetically, by last name. Should a councillor not wish to respond to the request, they may say so, and I will move to the next name on the alphabetical list. Regarding speaking to our business councillors tonight, will identify themselves through our conferencing technologies chat function. The clerk is assisting me tonight in maintaining the speaking order from that source. Councillors are allowed on their turn to deliver a primary question or comment and may make one supplemental. We will follow speaking order carefully, and any councillor wishing to have a second say will have to indicate again and go to the bottom of the list. This is a normal process consistent with Robert's Rules of Order, which govern our procedures. Councillors are reminded that if I believe you are not audible, I will call on you. You don't need to ask if you can be heard. I'll be the arbiter of that. It's amazing how many of these web meetings, that's probably the most important phrase of 2020. Can you hear me? Further, councillors are asked to maintain a mute state in the web conference until I've called upon you for a verbal reaction. Should any of your votes not show up in eScribe, our voting platform, I will call on you when things seem stalled to register a manual vote. At that time, take yourself off mute, answer yes or no on the motion, then return to mute. Regarding item 2.2 of our agenda, I have a motion before me for the adoption of the agenda for tonight's meeting that reads as follows: that the agenda for tonight's meeting be approved. Why don't we start with Deputy Mayor Kellum? Can I call on you to be our mover for that one?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnston, will you serve as our seconder?
Yes, I will second that.
Thank you very much. Any discussion or debate from the council on this matter? Seeing none, let's have that vote. So we're missing a vote from Councillor Richardson. What say you, Matt?
I am in favor. Nothing popped up. I'll just reboot. But I am in favor.
Thank you. So that is carried. Let's move on then to agenda item number 3, the so-called consent agenda. These items are placed on our agenda because they are believed to be non-contentious, yet they require either council's recognition or approval. Grouping them expedites our business. However, any councillor wishing to extract an item from the consent agenda for discussion, debate, and individual action may do so. There are 3 items on our consent agenda tonight, including the minutes of our last regular council meeting. Councillors, do any of you have a desire to extract any of these items for further discussion or action? I'll want you to indicate to the clerk should you have such a desire. Fairfelds, anything? Okay, so I have a motion related to these items and the consent agenda that reads as follows: that consent items 3.1 to 3.3 be received for information, and the minutes of the October 19th, 2020 regular council meeting be adopted. Can I call on Councillor Richardson to be our mover for that one?
I will move that motion.
Thank you. Councillor Rothwell, will you serve as seconder?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. Let's move forward then to agenda item number 4. As item 4.1, I'm delighted to welcome again Sally McMullen, Manager of Planning for Perth County, to our meeting tonight. She is here at the suggestion of County Council and my invitation to present to our council information about a proposed series of amendments to the current County of Perth official plan. For councillors, please note this does not pertain to the next official plan, which is a work in progress still, and I'm sure Sally can clarify that and maybe even give us a little progress update. But this is for the current plan. So Sally, welcome to North Perth, your home community. We're glad to have you with us tonight and invite your presentation at this time.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you for members of council. I'm appreciative of the clerk as well for helping me with my, make sure my slides arrive on the screen there for you to see. Yeah, we are talking tonight about a surplus farm dwelling consent policy revision, and that's proposing to occur through Official Plan Amendment 189. And the idea tonight being that I would run through the amendment with you and explain the various pieces of it, that we would have a chance to discuss and go through any questions that you have about it. And I have visited the other 3 lower tiers with the same presentation, and I'm eventually seeking that you as a council or you as individuals would provide your opinions and comments and questions through to us in order to evaluate the amendment itself and give it due process. So if we could have a look at the next slide, or that would be great. So this this particular policy has been in place for about 4 years, and actually we'll look at this one just quick. I'll digress for a second. There is a website out there right now, and you can see it, the URL there on the screen. It's available through the month of October, and it's out there in order for the public to give us comments. And when you visit that website, what you'll find is the amendment itself, an information report, and contained in that report, the text of the amendment. So the words in our current official plan that are meant to be removed or proposed to be added, And you'll also find at that site some frequently asked questions. And then there is an opportunity there to comment. So you can write in your comments on the various parts of the amendment or ask questions. And those are delivered in an email directly to me. So I do encourage you to share that URL. And I know North Perth has already posted it on their social media. And I thank you for that. And also to visit it and see what you can find there for more information. So we will go on to the next slide now, and I'll sort of head back to where I was, and that was that the policy has been in place for about 4 years, and it's always good to review policy and update it as needed. And in this case too, I think there have been some questions around implementation and feedback from applicants and certain points of efficiency too that we have found through implementation that we could improve through this amendment. So the amendment itself has about 5 pieces to it, and we will touch on each of these as we go through. So the next slide will bring us to the first point, which is really about a current requirement in our official plan that a surplus house is eligible by way of it being considered surplus to a farm operation that's also located within the county of Perth. And so what it's asking is for us to measure a farm operation based on the location of its land holdings. And we can all, I'm sure, consider or vision farm operations with land holdings that cross municipal boundaries. And so I've brought here on the slide the actual definition from the provincial policy statement of what it means when it says resident surplus to a farming operation. And that is a habitable farm residence that's rendered surplus as a result of farm consolidation. So the acquisition of additional parcels of farms, and they're to be operated as one farm unit. So what this amendment proposes is to measure eligibility of a farm operation based on which land holdings it operates as one business, and not necessarily where those particular holdings are located. So the proposal then is to remove the reference to that farm operation having a land holding within the county of Perth that this house is surplus to. And part of that is certainly fueled by the reality that we do get a number of applications for official plan amendment to provide specific relief to this criteria, and it's very consistently approved. So perhaps the utility of that particular criteria isn't being upheld in practice. And again, looking at the measure of a farm operation and that eligibility of it being its holdings in general rather than the location of them. So if we could go on to the next slide, that'll bring us to a conversation about minimum size. And minimum size is the first of the next 4 items. And really, each one of these items is going to revolve around this concept of residential use. So the residential use being the purpose for creating the lot, and really looking at what do we mean by residential use and what do we mean by accessories to it. So when we consider accessory uses, certainly we think of garages, swimming pools, and things like that. And I think we can all probably envision too that in a rural context where these particular residential uses are located, some of the accessory uses will look different or feel different than they do in town, slightly larger structures and such. And things that we wouldn't maybe see in town, like windbreaks or, groves of trees that are between the house and the shed or what have you. So it's really asking us to consider that the rural residential use is going to look a little different than what it is in town. And there's a rural nature to that, and the requirement to perhaps store larger equipment for the maintenance of that property and those kinds of things. So the overarching goal being to protect agricultural land, is the most important part of this. And so what we really have to do when we look at each one of these applications is ask ourselves if everything inside of that proposed line is really residential in use or accessory to that residential use, and that being the test. And the part in quotes there at the top of the slide is from the provincial policy statement, and that's really where we find the strength and the teeth for this overarching goal and objective to protect agricultural land, that the law be the minimum size needed to accommodate the use, being that residential use, and the appropriate servicing for that. And so what we're proposing through this amendment is that if we're considering rural severances and these properties having characteristics that are different than in town, then what we're going to find is that there are unique characteristics of individual properties that will help us to define the use, the residential use, and the accessory uses. And that word underlined, the use, from the definition or from the policy in the PPS is really including those accessories. So what's proposed then is, in the text of the amendment, is to remove some of the prescribed language around what an accessory could be and let the process itself unfold and use these tests of protecting agricultural land, minimum size, and individual characteristics of that property to really truly evaluate the use itself and anything that's accessories to it, and to use those as the determining factors of what the lot size would actually be. And I think there's a common misconception out there that, and this, you'll find this in the frequently asked questions on the website too, is that sometimes we receive applications and they're just by the location of those residential features and its accessories that sometimes there's a corner left or an irregular lot line or what have you, and that, or maybe there's a stand of trees right near the house that is quite large. And those are things that we would commonly find on farms. And so they're not necessarily or automatically to go with the house just because they create something that is perceived to be not useful for farming. There's still areas of the farm that we would find on farms throughout the county. And so to sever them to go with the house just for that reason is really not in keeping with the notion of minimum size and really trying to identify what inside that line is really about a residential use. So again, the purpose of the amendment on this topic is to remove some of the prescribed language around accessory uses and let these tests just help us to define that and look at each property as an individual place with different characteristics that are going to be factors in determining that. So the next slide then, it talks about home industries. And this again is building on the concept of accessory. So what we're trying to do with this amendment is, in Perth County, certainly we want to support different employment types, and we want to encourage people who have the initiative to find ways to work from home. And currently we do that through home occupations, and that's something that's permitted today on a surplus farm dwelling lot. And what we'd like to do is introduce a new term called home industries that would allow people to do different types of work. So a home industry is something that would constitute working from home, but that occurs inside of a garage or a shop or an accessory structure and isn't as appropriate to do inside of a house, like a home occupation. So common examples of a home occupation would be a bookkeeper perhaps, or a hairdresser, but someone perhaps who makes chairs or fixes cars, they can't do that inside their house. And so what we're trying to do with this amendment is to consider a broader range of types of work that people might do from home to earn a living. And what it really comes down to make this work is scale and ensuring that the business itself remains secondary to the house. and to the residential use. So the other thing that you'll find in the amendment is a list of provisions, and those are meant to guide the scale and the parameters of that home industry to really ensure that it continues to look and feel like a residential property. We're really trying to balance the opportunities for people and not discriminate based on the type of work that someone does, and give people the opportunity to work from home when they have different types of work that they do. So it's really, again, about scale. And that's what this amendment is trying to get at, is to create those provisions and to create those opportunities for working at home on these lots. And ultimately what we find, and I have worked in municipalities where this is permitted, and ultimately what we find is some of those businesses are quite successful and they end up growing, or the owner of that place wants to the owner of that business, wants to grow or wants to hire employees. And at that point, it really is time to move to town. And so oftentimes when people were establishing these businesses or they wanted to grow them, it really came down to just a really good discussion about the purpose of allowing people to work at home, and yet it remaining a residential feel and look to the property. So I recognize people too put a lot of investment into these businesses, and so I do encourage folks setting up at home that they invest in their equipment and the modifications perhaps to the building that they need to do, but to recognize that a business plan for this must include succession, that it would eventually move to town if it's intended to grow, and if that's what the owner of that business really wants. So a home industry is really for the people that live on the property to make a living from home. And we're really just trying to find that balance between encouraging that or allowing that, and then having an ability to look at different types of work that people might do. So on the next slide, we have the last two pieces, and they both, again, build on the concept of and the notion around accessory use. And we're going to talk about barns, and we're going to talk about livestock, and those, albeit related, are different topics. So we'll start with barns. And what we want to achieve with this amendment is to recognize that there are a number of barns in our countryside in Perth County, and they really are part of our identity here, and they're certainly part of our cultural heritage. So if there's an opportunity to understand what set of circumstances would we need to have in place to allow them to remain, then what does that look like? So it kind of comes down to two main things, and that is that it wouldn't be used for livestock anymore, because again, these lots are created in an effort to provide a residential use, not create small farms. And the other thing would be that they are in close proximity to the house. So bringing us back to that minimum size test. And are the buildings sufficiently clustered that barn could be considered, could it be repurposed? Could it be considered accessory? And is it situated in a way that it's not contributing to, the size of the parcel getting really stretched out? So that's what the amendment is aimed at with respect to barns. And if we consider, we've talked then about the barns that are on the severed lot, but what about those barns that are on the retained farm parcel? And certainly those can remain as livestock operations provided they meet MDS, but many times more often than not, they're gonna be located closer to the cluster. And so from that perspective, and again, building on this notion of accessory, can they be repurposed, and can they be considered then an accessory structure for the farm use that's happening on the retained land? And making it possible for that to be considered. Maybe they would get used for storing wagons or equipment or what have you, or hay or straw. And so it's this notion of accessory and allowing those buildings to be used for things on those properties as existing building stock, provided that there was a concerted effort and demonstration that they were in fact being repurposed and not being used for livestock anymore, that would then contravene zoning or MDS. So then we'll talk a little bit about livestock and the keeping of animals. And we continue to get requests for people to keep animals on some of the surplus farm dwelling parcels. And certainly the rural nature and rural location of these properties make people more interested in having a few animals or a chicken coop or what have you. And so, again, what we're trying to do is build on this concept of accessory. And is it accessory to a residential use? Meaning, are the animals that are being kept there belonging to and used for or for the enjoyment of or pets of the people who live on the property? And if that's the case, then perhaps we could open this door a little bit and take a baby step toward keeping of animals on these lots, because right now it is prohibited. So again, it comes down to scale and ensuring that these are not wading into the territory of being considered or potentially considered livestock operations. And so how will we do that? And what's proposed in the amendment is landing on a number, which we typically don't do in official plans, but in this case, a universal number throughout the province that's sort of known or understood in other contexts. And that being the MDS guidebook, suggesting that 10 meters squared and at that size, that a structure housing animals under 10 meters squared is not contributing to incompatibilities or other issues related to livestock. So that's where we landed with the amendment on how will we determine something that is trying to achieve that balance between keeping animals and yet limiting it, so that we can sort of get into this permitted use in a gradual way. So in doing so, I did find the need to talk to some of our colleagues over at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and OMAFRA, because this is an agricultural designation. So even when we separate these parcels off and create the small residential lots, they're still in our agriculture designation within the official plan and in our landscape. So the question arises, are we allowed to limit livestock at all in an agricultural area? And are there provincial things that would prevent us from doing that? And certainly when it comes to livestock operations, the Nutrient Management Act would supersede any official plan, policy or zoning that we put in place. So, so it's important to really not get into the territory of livestock operations and really focus on it being accessory to that residential use and for the residents only. So again, I talked to those folks and they understand the notion that we're not, these parcels that we're creating are not small farms, not meant to be small farms. And if they in fact tend towards that or trend towards that, then we're really sort of threatening the whole concept of surplus farm dwelling and the whole idea of severing it for a residential purpose. So they recognize that, and also the balance of that with it being in the agriculture designation and should we be limiting livestock in an agriculture designation. And so they understand the balance that we're trying to reach there. And I think in truth, there's still a little bit on the fence, I would say, of what exactly their position is on this matter, but they continue to circle back to zoning. And if we can identify through zoning that it is clearly a residential use, and even if we sort of refrain from the words agriculture in the naming of that zone, although we do use an agriculture zone here in Perth County for these lots, and in neighboring counties they do as well. the province has sort of stopped pushing too hard on this topic of should we be allowed to limit. And I think they recognize that if we are really intending a residential use here, that protects the whole concept of a surplus farm dwelling severance process, and also allows people to keep animals, which they recognize is something that is reasonable and people want to do as an accessory use, especially in a rural neighborhood. So that's where we've landed with the amendment on that too. Then is to take a baby step towards allowing it, and sort of take a gradual approach to it, and then use something that's known, like the 10 square meters from MDS to create that limit. So that brings us through the different pieces of the amendment. I think there is one more slide there, and it's really just a bit of a summary that these are the pieces that I want to explain to you, and that the idea being that if I can get out and talk about it at each of the lower tiers and encourage more of the public to hear it and to respond to it, that would put us in a position to be more informed, to go to the county council with a recommendation about this amendment. And at present, with the website being up for the month of October, and then wanting to hear back from the municipalities, the earliest that would happen would be sometime in November. So, depending on what I get back from folks, will sort of dictate more of the timing of when this would go to county council. But I will say, as of the weekend, I had 93 visits on the website, and I had 5 responses to date, and then I got 2 more today. So perhaps there's been more than 93 visitors as well at the site. So yeah, I continue to track that, and mostly favorable responses to date as well. So yeah, I'm just really glad to be able to come and go through it with you, and certainly want to discuss pieces that you want to talk about and answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Sally. Okay, Council, I'll invite your questions. I think we need to explore, in the aftermath of a question period here, how this council would choose or elect to respond. By my math, the earliest possible county council meeting where this matter would be considered is November 19th, which gives us a few weeks to respond with and appropriate responses. So I think my goal is not to have all of your comments spilled out tonight. I think that what we should think about is our approach to this, and what I'd like to do is first have you ask questions, maybe gentle comments, but let's not take this into the debate realm if we can avoid that. And then I'll call on CAO Snell and ask him for his perceptions on behalf of the corporation for how we might go about preparing any response to this for that November 19th County Council meeting, assuming that that's the first possible date for contributions from local councils. So let's queue up questions. And as I said, gentle comments will, if you lapse into debate, I might move on. Again, as usual, please indicate to the clerk, and we'll start up the questioners list. Prepare, folks. Councillor Johnston first.
Thank you, Mayor Todd, and thank you, Sally, for the presentation. It did explain it much better to me. My question deals with the home industry. So if a house is severed and it has a large shop on it, and someone starts their business in that shop, and several years down the road, they're up to 5 to 7 employees. How do we shut that business down or force them to move to town, and who forces them to move? I'm just worried about how we would police something like that. Thank you.
Sally?
Yeah, through you to council. Once someone was at the point of 5 to 7 employees, they've really surpassed the the permissions that this amendment would give them in the first place. So what we're really trying to do is allow the people who live at the farm to make a living from home. And if they want to have a business that has employees, they really need to start already on a lot that's zoned appropriately for that, depending on what type of business, whether they need an industrial zone or a commercial zone or what have you. So I think it really comes down to the provisions that are in that official plan, implementing them through zoning, and then it would fall on enforcement of zoning to police it. And perhaps you would want to use your business license process to help you track who's out there and what they're doing, what types of businesses they have. And I do think it would be helpful at some point to look at some middle of the road opportunities for people who have businesses that they start at home and then they need to grow. So we need probably to work together to figure out, is there a way that we can inspire or permit, or I mean, we would permit something like this already, but a place where people, like a development essentially, where people could rent space for that middle step. So they've gone from being their own business at home, they need to hire some employees. Is there rental space available for them? So that's, I think, where I'd like to go with it, to give folks other opportunities, like other places where they can go as a stepping stone to grow their business. Because to go from operating a business at home by yourself or with your, one of your kids or your spouse, and then to go to right to buying property and building a building is quite a stretch for people. So I think part of people being successful at running businesses is for the encouragement and the development of that middle ground for them. So I would like to see how we can help influence that a little bit as well. But to get back to this amendment, it's really not to allow people to have employees at home, and it is going to rely on zoning compliance and the enforcement of zoning compliance to police it.
Dave, anything further?
So just who would police that zoning? Does that fall to North Perth, or is that Perth County? I'm just not, sorry, I don't understand the process. So who would force that business to move to town or to shut down?
So Dave, my understanding of that is that because the zoning bylaw applies to North Perth, it would be North Perth that would enforce that zoning bylaw through bylaw enforcement officers or other appropriate law enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sally, anything on that?
No, that's exactly what I was going to add, is that it would come down to zoning compliance and a bylaw enforcement authority of some sort.
Thank you. And what I heard, which interested me, is that in your comments about this, it's like there's a missing middle for industry as well as for those in the housing market. So that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I definitely see a parallel there. And it's a lot to ask people to jump from this kind of a scale to ownership of land and buildings, I think.
Right. Thank you. Clerk Phelps. Councillor Behrens is next.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. McMullen. I do have a few concerns about the proposed amendments. Several times during your presentation, you mentioned that this is the reason for the lot creation is residential use. So it's really a mystery as to why all of a sudden we're going to introduce a new term called home industry. Some of the examples you gave I don't think are really viable, because there would be no reason for a severance to contain a barn that holds hay or straw if there's no animals on that lot. There would be no reason for the barn to go with the lot. The zoning of it could be rural residential, period. That doesn't mean it's agriculture, it just means it's in the rural area and it is residential. And you said that the home industry must be secondary to the residents, but I still, like, I understand, perhaps an artist works with metal or, stained glass or something, and it's not appropriate to do in the house, or a small electrician, keeps a small shed full of supplies and things like that. I don't have any issue with those types of things, but when we start to call it industry, I think the terminology is incorrect. My one concern too is when you say that the farm doesn't have to be in Perth County. And I know we've had a number of examples where there were farms right across the boundary that farmers owned. But here is the problem that I have with all of it, is that it says is operating as a consolidated unit. How do you decide that? Is it that it is an incorporation? Is it a partnership? Because I know many farmers that own more than 3 farms. Could be 5 farms, could be 10 farms. But 5 of the farms could be operated independent of the other 5. 5 may be in one corporation, the others could be independent and not considered a consolidated farm operation. My concern is, we're here in Perth County. I don't have any issue with, someone owning land across the boundary in Minto or in Howick or in Grey Township or in Maryborough Township. My concern is what happens if they own land in Port Elgin and they're trying to say that it's a consolidated farm occupation or consolidated farming operation. I don't think that's legit. And I think I do have several concerns on what is being proposed with not just barns, but with animals as well. I do understand that, yeah, is there any reason why they can't have 5 hens? Probably not. Is there a reason why they can't have 5 to 10 beef cattle? Sure. You keep saying that it is if for rural lot creation, and I was on when we did this first policy, and that was always the debate, was this is to save rural farm houses and to repopulate the rural area, period, with people, not individual little industries or anything more than that. So those are my comments. Sally, if you could comment on how you're going to determine consolidation, I would thank you for that.
Okay.
Okay, Sally, so view that, some of that as question?
Yeah, I have sort of 3 topic areas, I think, that I could shed a bit more light on. So through you to council then, the first one being the home industry. And actually there was a second part to that. Okay, so the home industry, yeah, perhaps the name isn't ideal. It is a name I borrowed from Huron County, but I was trying to work something in keeping with home occupation. So the home occupation is really what I'm trying to build on, and it's really for the residents of that house. And that's what we intend with this as well. And we're really just trying to get at, like right now, what's permitted is a home occupation. You can make a living at home if the type of work that you do is in the house, but we don't, technically, they would not be permitted to make a living from home if their business wasn't conducted inside the house. And so that could be seen as discrimination towards the type of work that people do. And so what we're trying to get at is people making a living at home. They may do different types of work, and creating a set of provisions, regardless of what we end up calling it, if it's home industry or something else, a set of provisions that would actually allow someone or create the permission that they could work from home, even if their work doesn't occur inside the house. So it's just trying to create that parallel to home occupation for the occupants of the lot. So people who live there, people who, and then the provisions do that, but they also speak to things like outdoor storage and employees, so that you are not, it really helps us to focus on making sure that this continues to look and feel like a residential, like a home, like a place where someone lives, not a business. That the business that they're doing is the living that they're making, but it's not starting to look and feel like a business, a place of business, or a commercial or an industrial lot. So that's a little bit more on the home industry side of things. And you mentioned too the hay or straw being kept in the barn, and I was actually referring in that case to if the barn was to remain on the retained farmland. So I was just giving an example of what it might be used for as an accessory to the farm use if it was to be kept on the retained farmland instead of being kept on the severed lot for the house. Because in either case, whether it's on the severed lot or the farm lot, what we want, I think, to arrive at is an opportunity for those buildings to be repurposed and given a new sort of lease on life, that they wouldn't have to be removed simply because they were used for livestock or were purpose-built for livestock in the past. That if we could repurpose them, then that would allow them to be considered accessory uses to those things without violating any MDS or on the retained farmland, or violating any zoning on the severed residential lot. So I hope that clarifies that one a little bit. And then we also, you also talked about consolidated farm operations, and we do require when they apply that they bring us. Sometimes we need to actually see their articles of incorporation, but essentially we look at if it's a corporation or if it's a partnership, that the property, the farm, the severed house is on, and the property they're saying that it is surplus to, are owned by the exact same entity. So they must be owned collectively by one corporation that is operated as one business. And they demonstrate that through showing us the PIN, the property identification from registry, showing the owner of the property, and on both the lots. And then if necessary, if it's convoluted in any way or we can't figure it out, then we do need supporting documentation showing us who is the owners of these businesses, and how does the entity that owns this lot, lot A, also loan lot B. So we do make them demonstrate that they're being treated and operated as one operation through one entity alone. So that is part of the requirement today and would continue to be. And you also talked about animals and the keeping of, and that I think you suggested that, perhaps we could consider, 5 hens okay, but 5 to 10 cattle gets to be, something that is maybe not just for the use of the people living there. And so we do have to somehow determine what we consider accessory. And again, accessory always comes back to the people that live there and the residential use that they have. So is it accessory to that or not? And we need to land on something to help us determine that what scale we're going to consider accessory, which is why I proposed the 10 square meters. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's really probably only useful for small numbers of small animal types, but it's trying to, again, take this baby step into the keeping of animals and give us some experience with it gradually.
Thanks, Sally. Julie, any other questions?
Oh, just a concern. I just don't understand why, if this is truly rural residential and it's all about the residents, why we must consider the keeping of animals.
Okay, so Sally, you may want to take note of that as a concern. I don't know if there's a quick question or a quick response to that or not.
I think generally we continue to get requests. Can I keep, often it's something that exists already. So, for instance, a couple of months back, there was a chicken coop located between the house and the garage, and it was very tiny. It maybe held 12 hens, but under the current policy, it had to be removed. And so it just seemed like if you can't keep a few chickens or 5 hens, from your example, on this rural property, for your own use, then where can you do that? And I know that's a difficult thing to say right now in North Perth, but it really came down to that. Like, can we reasonably extend the keeping of some animals to the people who live in these houses and in a rural context that want to keep some laying hens or something for themselves?
I think that would be subject to local bylaws with regards to the zoning bylaw and also exotic animals, as this council has made some determinations that potentially impact that in a recent meeting. All right, I think next up is Councillor Rothwell. Questions?
Thanks very much, Mayor Todd, and thank you, Sally, for your report. Obviously, there's been lots of discussion about this, and I tuned into the public meeting County Council had, and what I'm concerned about are a couple of issues, but I'm going to ask a question following up on the 2 previous councillors about home industry. Could you give us the size that you're considering for this? I mean, in the current county official plan, there's discussion about home occupations, which are inside of dwellings, and the zoning bylaw gives specific provisions in terms of sizing. The secondary farm occupation provisions, though, in the agriculture designation began as approximately 2,000 square feet and now are just over 4,000 square feet. And again, that's in the agriculture designation on agriculturally zoned properties. Home industry is new, which you've mentioned. What sizing are you talking about in terms of what we could anticipate, please?
Yeah, I haven't specified or prescribed a size, and I do think that that's a zoning discussion that we'll have. If the concept of a home industry is palatable and useful, then it would be something that a lower tier could choose to implement through zoning or not. The official plan creates the permissions, and then you can choose how you want to do it within your zoning, provided that you're not provided that at least the provisions in the official plan are adhered to. So again, I haven't landed on a specific size, and it does need to be discussed locally, and I would want to be helpful in those conversations as well. And like you say, there is a home occupation size, and there's secondary farm size, business sizes, and perhaps we need to arrive at a size for these as well in your zoning bylaw.
Okay, my next question specifically deals with, I'm just concerned about your wording of baby steps when we're dealing with livestock operations. And again, I shared with you some information regarding our neighboring municipality over in North Huron, and 2 years ago, they had a specific, very public matter that went before the local council, and then it was discussed by many of the local municipal councils in Huron County, and then some changes were made and charges were dropped as a result of some of these changes here. But again, this was in an AG4 zone, which is a traditional zone which Huron County uses to implement provisions for a secondary farm occupation, and the young farmers chose to have livestock, begin to raise livestock, which there was issues that were brought before the township complaints, and charge was laid and so on. So very public here, but it ended up that, as I shared with you, the Nutrient Management Act superseded the provisions, as you rightly pointed out in your discussion here. So the concern I have is that when we talk about, quote, baby steps, if 10 square meters is a relatively small area, and for those on the Imperial side, it's 109 feet. So you're not going to necessarily get a whole lot of cattle in there and so on. You're probably going to get a few more chickens and such. But who's to say that they need to have housing inside a building? And what happens when we are in fact dealing with free range chickens and grazing of cattle and so on? How do we deal with that? And if we truly are going to permit the raising of livestock on properties that are created through the surplus farmhouse severances, please.
Sally?
Yeah, I think that the example you gave in the AG4 zone in Huron County, they are using nutrient units as a limit. So they, in their AG4, I believe they're allowed up to 4 nutrient units, and that does entertain then the keeping of cattle, probably more than 1 cow, or a horse or what have you. And I think my reference to baby steps was that with the 10 square meters as our limit, that we weren't going to get into that territory where if we don't allow it to happen inside of a larger building and we only permit it in a structure that's less than 10 square meters, then we will be creating the parameters that we're allowing people to keep animals in. And so what I'm trying to do is create the line that at which point you cross it, you're getting into something that is beyond accessory to a residential use, and therefore could be considered not really just for the folks that live there, or and so I'm really trying to keep it limited, because it does seem reasonable to allow someone to keep a few chickens on their property if they live in the country and they want to have eggs or whatever. But it also, we need to not get into a situation where something is considered a livestock operation, because that's when the Nutrient Management Act has superseding powers. And under 10 square meters is when MDS doesn't get applied. So I just picked that because it's out there already. It's a known entity, and I really wanted to get it out there and sort of have these conversations and try and figure out if this is a reasonable way to limit this, and do we want to wade into this territory of keeping animals? And if we do, is this a reasonable line to establish? Because if there are folks out there who want to push that line and go past it, and they start keeping animals, like worst case scenario, we allow someone to keep a bank barn as an accessory use because it's been repurposed. And then, 10 years down the road, maybe it's the same owner, maybe it's a new owner, but now they've actually, done some renovations inside, or maybe they didn't even, maybe they just slapped up some pens and they're bringing water in buckets, and now they're keeping calves in there or whatever, or they're keeping a couple horses in there, whatever. That is crossing the line that we've established here in our official plan for keeping of animals on a surplus farm dwelling lot. And yeah, the enforcement of that would be through zoning provisions, because we would, in order to implement this, we would have to have provisions in your general provisions in your zoning bylaw, and we'd have to have specifics in the AG1-1 zone that we use for these lots. So the enforcement is going to fall on the lower tier if you choose to use these provisions of the official plan. So yeah, it's not an easy thing to figure out. And I have thrown thrown a few topics out there at the same time, and I'm hoping that we can figure out the barn conversation at the same time we figure out the keeping of animals conversation. But I am trying to establish lines, clear lines that are potentially enforceable, and to keep it in the realm of being defined as accessory.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anstead, I think we have you next on the list.
No, that was a typo. I apologize. Thank you.
The cat crossed your keyboard. Okay, do we have anyone else on the list, Clerk Fairfields? All right, so Thank you, Sally. Don't run away yet. Yes. Councillor Rothwell, you have a few more questions.
Oh, just one more question. It's related to some issues that I think it's fair to say that North Perth Council has been concerned about a few decisions of the Land Division Committee with respect to the existing policy, and the proposed amendments here talk specifically about allowing uses that and potentially areas that are more substantial in size than what's solely required to service the residential use itself. And by this, I'm talking about former drive sheds and so on that were part of the farm operation. And truly, if we are going to be looking at allowing for home industries as you've proposed, Sally, I think the concern is that I would have in terms of what truly is the size that's required. And I'll give you an example of this. When my wife and I bought our first farm 24 years ago, it was a 50-acre farm, and there was a house, old barn, and a drive shed. Previous owners had planted grass, and they were mowing the whole area, including about an acre and a half around the drive shed. And after I cut it once, I talked to our brothers-in-laws after I talked to my wife and said, we can't do this. So that was all turned into cultivated field. If we have Farmer Joe and Jane that are avid gardeners or just love large lawns and so on, their severance application for a surplus farmhouse, if they come to the time that they want to sever their house from the balance of their farm, if they've sold it to a consolidated farm operation, why is it that we would allow for grassed area, which is for the most part in Perth County, 90% of us are our land is primary agricultural lands, very fortunate. Why would we allow for that to occur as opposed to having it remain with the farm? And that's my real concern here. There's very clear established limits in my view in terms of the provincial policy statement, in terms of the amount of land that's required for surplus farm residents and that's servicing. Whereas I think there's a bit more liberal interpretation that majority of Land Division Committee members have taken with respect to a few of the severance applications, which is questionable in my view. Thank you.
Okay, Sally, yeah, if you will give that a shot.
Yeah, I did want to talk a little bit about sort of the bounds of a surplus dwelling. So when something's proposed, when it comes in, and what we tend to look at, and I do sort of like the scrutiny for me starts to dial up. Like anything over an acre is when I start to really dial in and say, okay, is everything inside this line something that we can consider either the residential use itself or an accessory to it? And is it sometimes is bounded by more concrete or firm items. So like if there is a garden, ideal, like it would be, if it was between the house and the accessory building, that's fairly easy to figure out. If it's not, then and it's a very large garden, then it's extending out past what would normally you kind of see as like where the yard would be. Then we try to have those conversations with people about, you know, you really need to consider something smaller. Or windbreaks, I think, is something that probably we would agree to disagree on. I have been looking at them as an accessory to the house. They are sort of one of those firm boundaries that I was referring to, where it's an existing tree line that was put up to provide a windbreak for that dwelling. And so if it's, you know, if it's in close proximity to it, then putting the line outside of that and allowing that to go with the lot could be considered an accessory use. So it really comes again to this notion that every property is unique and there's no one number that we land on, and there's no prescribed set of accessory uses that we land on. We do have to work a little bit with what's there and consider that we wouldn't necessarily it wouldn't be desirable to make someone to exclude a building if it was fairly close, and then allow them enough space, really, if they're allowed to have a building, to turn around and then build a new one that's closer to the house. So we do try to find a balance between what we would consider an accessory use and where they're located, and try to work a little bit with what's there. And Land Division Committee perhaps has been taking more liberal approaches, and that's largely, I think, a reflection of the way I look at surplus dwelling severances and determining accessory things. And perhaps the guidance I've been giving them, I would be willing to say that I have been the reports coming out of the department have been lending more towards an interpretation of accessory. And so, again, it's at the end of the day, the test is everything inside that line a residential use or it's accessory use? And am I, as a planner, willing to stand up at a hearing and defend that when I provide that recommendation? And so that's where we land on those things, and why the amendment is proposed the way it is, to remove some of that prescriptive language about what 4 or 5 things could be considered accessory, and allowing us to look at each property individually and determine that on a case-by-case basis, and letting the test of minimum be applied to every property with those definitions in place. So that's really what's being proposed.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so let me turn the floor, if I may, over to CAO Snell with regards to the opportunity for this council to respond to this OPA. Chris, do you want to make some suggestions about how we might move forward so that we hit the reasonable deadline of November 19th, which is the county, and in fact, maybe even roll that back by a few days to allow for their usual notice to county councillors their meeting package?
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. I would suggest that we would ask Sean to send an email out to all members of Council tomorrow based on tonight's presentation from Sally, and we could consolidate those comments and maybe give a timeline as of a week from today to have those comments into the planner. We can consolidate those and bring back a proposal or a report on November the 9th. And that would give us some time to hopefully approve it that night, but also, if not, we could at least give council, county council, either a motion to defer and that we'll have comments later after the 19th, or we could agree to send some comments in, and that would give some time for the county council package to go out to the county council members.
Great, thanks, CAO Snell. Let me poll council then. CAO Snell has made what I think is a reasonable recommendation for process moving forward. Does anyone on council wish to vehemently disagree with that? And if so, let's hear from you. Else, you seeing anything? Okay, so it sounds like we have our approach moving forward. Clerk Berfelds, do we need to give direction to staff on this matter for the sake of moving forward? Okay. Okay, so Clerk Berfelds has just sort of rhymed off the top of her head an appropriate resolution that council might consider. Sally, don't leave yet. And that resolution is to the effect that council directs the North Perth planner, Sean Yilmaz, to collect feedback from councillors for the purposes of preparing a report that will be presented to council in early November or in the first part of November for the purposes of council discussion and next steps. Sound right to anyone? Anyone want to change anything about that? That was sort of the resolution. I'm hoping Danette was keeping up with us. She's giving me the gentle yes nod, so it sounds like she's keeping up. Okay, can I call on Councillor Seiler to be our mover for that?
I will move that.
Thank you. And Councillor Andreessen, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that motion.
Thank you very much. Any discussion or debate on that one? I'm waiting to see if eScribe is caught up with us here. What do we think? Do we have something in eScribe that we can use? Okay, so we're ready to go. Let's have that vote then. Okay, I'm not seeing the vote view at this point. Okay, so the deputy clerk advises me that that is carried. We're going to work to get the vote tallies back on the screen here. There's a little technical delay, we think. Sally, thank you for coming. We know that planning staff at the county and yourself as the leader of this have done a lot of work on this particular OPA, and we appreciate that there are some controversies built into it, of course, as we consider change, but we sure appreciate you coming to this council and presenting the information to us so that we can make some informed thinking happen on our behalf and to represent North Perth interests. So much appreciated, and we look forward to next steps with you on this.
My pleasure, thanks. And I do look forward to hearing the feedback and comments from your council and whether or not you still have questions. I think that's an important factor before moving ahead.
Thank you. And I'm sure that if questions do emerge, we'll find a way to route them to you so that we can get appropriate responses. Appreciate it. Okay. I'm just sort of watching the clerk table. Do we think we have eScribe back? Okay, well, we're working on it. All right, sounds good. So next up then, we're on to agenda item number 5, which is reports from departments and key staff. First, let's have reports from the CAO's department. There's a few of them tonight. As item 5.1.1, we have a report pertaining to the imminent launch of PC Connect, a new community transit system for Perth County. We are asked tonight to promulgate an agreement with the county related to locations of bus stops, and we'll need to act with the bylaw. I'm going to ask CAO Snell to address his report and proposed actions for council. Welcome back, Chris. Welcome.
Thank you again. Tonight's report really is just an update about the PC's Connect Community Transit Bus and the purpose of signing an agreement with the County of Perth for bus stop accesses along the bus route. The proposed route will be going through Listowel, Atwood, and Moncton with bus stops in all 3 locations. And tonight's is an update on the progress of the project, as well as showing the routes and bylaw to consider the bus stop agreement. We will be receiving a similar agreement from Stratford for their part of the project, and that bus stop will be also at the North Perth Library. Just one sort of update. It does sound like we do have the buses in place for the soft launch for all the routes as of today's best of information I have today. So that is great news. So we are looking forward to the soft launch in mid-November. And it looks like we do have buses for all those routes. So hopefully that stays in place and we can anticipate the soft launch and a full launch early in 2021. Thank you.
Thanks, CEO Snell. Councillors, if you have any questions or first comments on this action, please direct them to the chat function to Clerk Phelps. Do we have anything? Okay, so I have Deputy Mayor Kellum. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Todd. So just, you caught my ear there, Chris. With regards to the soft launch, is the route every day or every other day or every 3 days or something? If you could fill me in on that, please.
My understanding, as long as we are receiving the buses and the bus drivers, we will be operating on the roads every day.
Perfect. So that's changed.
And isn't that good news, given that I stuck my neck out on that one? Thank you again for the information update. Any further questions? Councillor Seiler?
Thank you, Mayor Todd. Chris, just would you ever be someday that this might connect to Elmira from Listowel here, that we can, because there's a bus that runs from Elmira into Kitchener. Is there any way we can have that connection that people can get on and ride to Elmira, St. Jacobs or whatever, and use their transit to get into Kitchener?
So actually, if you recall, the Stratford project does currently right now contemplate a stop in Elmira. And also it contemplates a stop at Conestoga Mall. So both, there'll be a connection both in Elmira to the regional transit system as well as the rail system in Kitchener. And then the other stop would be actually at the downtown Kitchener GO station. So the Stratford intercity project will connect us both to the regional Waterloo systems as well as the GO system.
Thank you.
Thanks, Geo Snow. Councillor Rothwell next.
Yes, I think I found the answer. So November 16th is a soft launch date. Is that correct?
That's correct. And
Thank you.
There'll be hopefully some intensive advertising prior to the soft launch.
Thank you. That's good news.
It's very good news. And yeah, we are expecting some significant marketing based on reports that I've heard recently at committee about this. So I think I have to admit to being extremely delighted that the buses magically appeared that we needed so that we can get everyday service as opposed to every other day service in the county routes. That's very good news. Any other questions or comments from council? All right, so I have a resolution for consideration that reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth received the report titled PC Connect Community Transit Bus Stop Agreement as information, and that bylaw number 109-2020, being a bylaw to authorize the signing of a bus stop agreement, be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed, and that the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Councillor Estet, the honors to you. Will you serve as our mover?
Yes, I absolutely will. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Behrens, will you second that?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Thanks. Any discussion or debate, council? See no indication of that. Let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. And good news for sure. Item 5.1.2, we have received a report pertaining to the actions related to Farmgate promotions subsequent to a grant received by the County of Perth. We have been invited to lend some various types of support to a new initiative that will be funded through the county's grant. I believe Kim Couch is with us tonight. Is she or isn't she? Okay, so if Kim's not on, she was on. Did we lose Kim? Okay, maybe CEO Snell, did you want to make a few comments?
Actually, I believe Kim is available tonight, so I'll turn.
Sorry, I am here.
Right, thanks, Kim. Glad to have you here.
Great, thanks, Mayor Todd. So I just want to bring this forward to council for consideration. We have been approached by Perth County Economic Development and Tourism Department to partner with them in their Discover More Flavor Farmgate signage program that they received funding for from the Tourism Association of Ontario. And it is to expand upon a pilot that began, I think, last year with having signage at the Farmgate locations across the county. So the proposal is that we would own the signs, that would permit it to align with our current sign bylaw, and that the program itself would be managed, and that we would still, provide support to them in that program, but that it would expand upon it. They would be promoting and marketing, as well as be contacts with the different businesses, and would, we've heard lots of requests for the farm gate maps to expand, and that is the request before you for us to participate in agreement with the county Economic Development and Tourism Department to participate in that program, and that we would be owners of the signs themselves.
Okay, Council, any questions or first comments on this matter? Councillor Rothwell?
Thanks, Mayor Todd, and thanks for your report. I appreciate that, and I think this is a good news story. I did take a look, I believe, and can you correct me, Kim, are there 11 farm gates within North Perth that are currently on the farm gate map? Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I haven't done a current count. I know that that there was one increase to the current number that they're going to be looking at, but they will be reaching out to each of the current businesses. And they're hoping that this will help, the signage will help to promote as they're looking at reprinting. And given some of the current situation with the numbers in the province increasing, they are not going to do a full launch and full promotion of this program until the spring. And at that time, they will be doing a lot of promotion on it. So we're hoping that we would, if there are any additional businesses that are not captured online or on the map, that will have the opportunity to do that. And then we'll be able to incorporate that for the reprinting, and as we do the more formalized launch in the spring.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Quick thoughts? Okay, so I have a resolution for consideration, two actually on this matter. The first is that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth directs staff to participate in the Discover More Flavor Farm Gate Signage Program agreement with Perth County Economic Development and Tourism. Can I call on Councillor Duncan to be our mover?
I will move that.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Kellum, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I will second that motion.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate on that? Let's have that vote. We're missing one. Councillor Andreessen, we're missing you. What say you?
I'm in favor. Thanks.
Thank you. So that is carried. And next, then we have the bylaw to allow us to formulate this agreement that reads as follows. The bylaw number 138-2020 being a bylaw to authorize the signing of a farm gate agreement be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time and be finally passed. And the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Councillor Johnston, can I call on you to be a mover?
Yes, I would move that.
Thank you. And Councillor Richardson, will you serve as our seconder?
I will second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate on that one? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And Councillor Andreessen, I think we still have you out. What say you?
I'm in favor. Thanks.
Thank you. Often to solve these connection problems, go back to the home icon in the upper left and then reload the meeting, and that usually solves the problem. That's been my experience anyway. All right, let's move on to item 5.1.3. We have a report which explains renovations in quotes, to a particular committee that is part of our committee structures. Earlier, council was made aware of proposed changes to its committee related to economic development. Tonight, we are asked to approve and finalize these changes and make committee appointments. We need to do this with two different bylaws. So I'm going to call on Kim Couch, who we do know is here, to address her report and the proposed actions for council on this matter. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. So the report outlines the process that was undertaken to review the current terms of reference for the Economic Development Committee to the new proposed new North Perth Economic Development Advisory Committee. So we did do a review and updated terms of reference, details, mandate, purpose, as well as the composition of the committee to enable direct business participation across a variety of important sectors to North Perth and to the businesses of North Perth to encourage their involvement and engagement in advising council and making recommendations going forward. So the proposal is in front of you about updating the terms in the procedural bylaw, as well as updating naming the members that have been identified to represent each of these sectors and will continue for the term of council.
Thanks, Kim. Any questions from councillors?
Mayor Todd, I need to declare a conflict as I am related to one of the members being proposed.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Appreciate that. So Councillor Behrens will be documented as not participating in this vote due to conflict. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we have two resolutions here. The first relates to amending the bylaw with the definitions and the mandate of the new committee. It reads as follows: that bylaw number 146, I think I got this right, 2020, being a bylaw to amend the North Perth Boards and Committee Procedural Bylaw 150-2018, be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed. And the said bylaw be signed by the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Can I call on Councillor Rothwell to be our mover for that one?
I so move.
Thank you. Councillor Seiler, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate on this one, Council? Okay, Councillor Richardson, question.
Thank you. I apologize for not being on mute there for a moment. Just one thing I noticed in the report, Kim, it says you have one member aged 18 to 39. How do we dictate and why do we have an actual age?
I think it's in alignment with our youth attraction and retention strategy that we have purposed to include youth perspectives in as many committees or activities of the municipality as possible. So that was something that was proposed at the time, that, if where possible, that representation would include a youth perspective. And I do believe we have in those individuals that were, that was not the sole basis for their selection, but it will give that youth perspective in encouraging for youth attraction and retention in North Perth.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments at this time? Okay, so I have the second of the bylaw resolutions. This one is... We didn't vote on. Oh, we didn't vote on the first one. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, bad mayor. So not having any questions or comments, let's have that vote. They're laughing at me here. And that's carried, yes, thank you. And next up then is the bylaw that makes appointments of individuals to this committee. It reads as follows: that bylaw number 145-2020, being a bylaw to amend the North Perth Boards and Committee Appointment Bylaw 161-2018, be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed. Said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Can I call on Councillor Andreessen to be our mover for that one?
Mayor Todd, is it okay if I move since I'm on the committee? Is that okay?
I don't think there's a hesitancy. No, it's fine for you to be a mover.
Okay, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. And Councillor Anstead, will you serve as our seconder for this one?
Yes, I'll second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. And I'm going to take a moment actually to thank those who have stepped forward to serve on this new committee. This committee will be constituted of these following: Deputy Mayor Callum, Councillor Andreessen from Council, Andrew Coughlin representing Industry, Rebecca Newbigin representing Commerce, Tanya Haverkamp representing Agriculture, Martin Voigt representing the Creative Economy, and Trevor Reading representing Solo Entrepreneur. And I will serve on that committee as well because of my deep interest in economic development. So thank you to all of those who have agreed to join us on this committee. We look forward to some really amazing things coming forth from this group. Thank you. Now let's move on to our next item on our agenda. It is a rare meeting indeed that we don't have business to conduct originating from the clerk's office. Tonight is one such. I've marked it in my calendar. I will assure that this department remains very busy. I can assure that this department remains very busy with many different irons in the fire. And as always, my appreciation to them for their support in this meeting tonight. That means we'll move on to item 5.3, which are reports from the Recreation Department. And I'll call on item 5.3.1. Council is asked to award tender ice surfacing equipment for our arenas. I'll ask Interim Manager of Recreation, Amy Gangle, to address this matter. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Yes, before you is a report. If you recall, back in August, council gave the motion to proceed with a tender for 2 ice resurfacers with both pricing for propane and electric in 2020 for the purchase and delivery in 2021. So this is a 2021 capital item. You'll see the report before you has the comparisons of electric versus propane units, including environmental considerations. And I also included a report from August, which gave further detail. You'll see the breakdown in comparisons for electric versus propane, and with the details from our climate change coordinator. Given the cost difference, we did evaluate things and assessing things, and it was, deciding of environmental versus cost perspectives. But given the great difference between the units themselves and the general direction for council for us to tighten our budgets, staff have made the recommendation to go with 2 propane units. If council would like us to choose a different direction, we're welcome to that, but this would be council or staff's direction at this moment.
Thanks, Amy. Councillors, any questions of Amy on this report and matter? Do we have anything? Okay, so Councillor Rothwell.
Thank you, Mayor Todd. I want to thank Amy. The question I had was the current ice levers that we have on our units, whether we could reuse those on these new ones, but I have been informed that they, like other things, have life cycles, and certainly be looking forward at having new ones installed on each of the units. And I appreciate the comments and the fact that there's a local provider that I didn't know we had there. So good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council on this matter? Okay, seeing none, I have a resolution for our consideration. It reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth award the tender number NP-014-20T supply and delivery of 2 new propane ice resurfacers to Resurf Ice Corp. in the amount of $148,980, and the ice leveling system to Canadian Rink Services in the amount of $33,180 for the tender total of $182,160 HST excluded. Councillor Behrens, can I call on you to be our mover for that one?
Yes, I will move that.
Thank you. And Councillor Duncan, will you serve as our seconder?
Yes, I will second that.
Thank you very much. Any discussion or debate on this matter? Besides the general horror, actually, at this point in my frame of that difference in cost that we'd love to see come down. Anything, Clerk Bergfeld, to have? Okay, well, seeing that we have no questions or comments, I have a mover and a seconder, so let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. We turn now to item 5.4, reports from the Treasury and Finance Department. As item 5.4.1, Council is presented with its periodic report on project performance versus budget. I believe Ms. Hale is with us, and she's our Director of Finance and Treasurer to address this item. So, Fran, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mayor Kasenberg, members of council. This evening, the department heads through Becky have put together the detail of where we are at the end of September in terms of our capital expenditures. One of the things, though, that we'd like to do for you for next month would be to add a column that would also identify items where we have commitments. So, for example, our fire trucks, we've committed that. They're just a little bit behind because of COVID. Tonight you approved the purchase of the resurfacers. We'd identify that as well. Those sorts of things. We have some very large projects that we're committed to through contract or commitment of some form or another. And so we'll be adding a column next month that will identify those for you, just so you know where we're at. But as of now, if there's any questions that council has, I'd be more than happy to answer them, or if I'm unable to, would find the answer and get back to you.
Thanks, Ms. Hale. Councillors, questions on this report? Do we have anything? Okay, so I have a resolution then for our consideration that reads as follows. The Council of the Municipality of North Perth received the report entitled 2020 Project Budget Comparison Update September 30th for information. Can I call on Deputy Mayor Kellum to serve as our mover for that one?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnston, is he still with us, or did he step away? Councillor Johnston?
Yes, I would second that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Discussion or debate? Or questions? Okay. We're not seeing any, so let's have that vote. And that's carried. I do want to say to Ms. Hale and her colleagues in the finance department how much I think we all as councillors appreciate this report. It gives us a great deal of insight into where things are and how they're moving. And we know that it takes time on behalf of all of the department heads, so thank them as well for their efforts. But we appreciate that consolidation and report. Let's move to item 5.4.2. It's almost like a similar report, slightly different focus. Periodic report on operational spend and activities, performance versus budget. And again, Ms. Hale will tell us a little bit about this one. Go ahead, Fran.
Thank you, Mayor Kasenberg, members of council. The operations for 2020, as you're well aware, have been not typical for our departments. especially I'd say recreation at this point in time. And from the comments that were provided to you with regard to each of the areas of service, there were a number of anomalies, but for the most part, we seem to be on target. I would draw your attention though to the daycare. That is one that is still being trusted that the province will be coming through. Pat's been assured that there will be some cost recovery there. And so that's the one area of service that we provide where there's still a little bit of uncertainty, but we're feeling pretty confident that the province will come through and cover those costs. Otherwise, then I have outlined in the next report those COVID-related anomalies that we have been experiencing.
Thanks, Ms. Hale. Councillors, questions, comments? Anything on that one? Okay, so I have a resolution for our consideration. Again, it feels like second verse, same as the first, that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth receive the report entitled 2020 Operating Budget Comparison, third quarter for information. Can I call on Councillor Richardson to be our mover for that one?
Yes, I will move that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Rothwell, will you be our seconder?
Yes, I will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate on that one? Let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. And now let's move forward. One more report, one that is of, I think, particular interest these days. Council is presented with a report prepared by the Finance Department pertaining to organizational expense status directly associated with COVID-19 pandemic actions of the corporation. Ms. Hale, again, you're up. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Kasenberg, members of council. As you know, we have received financial support from the province of Ontario. And at this point in time, we took a very close look at where we have incurred costs from the pandemic that we have identified or reductions in revenues that have affected us. And we actually, at the very onset, having had some experience with emergency situations in the past, started to collect these in one spot. As it's turned out, that might not have been how they wanted us to do it, because they do want to have an overall view of how it's affected every different piece of the corporation. But that being said, we have accumulated $193,118 worth of expenses, some of which I feel if we started to go through them, that they might not be eligible in terms of some of the IT equipment that we've put towards that account at this time, and maybe some of the full-time staff, albeit that they've been reallocated, they might not be considered eligible. So that figure probably is a little conservative, and therefore we will have some hopefully left over from that we can apply to other places. Amy has done quite an extensive review of her overall department, and she's done a month by month for us. So we've been able to see it come along to the end of September. And at that time, she was netting out of about $33,000 more in net deficit. So a reduction in her revenues and some increases in their costs, but then there have been some cost savings in her department as well. So therefore it's come out to 33. We've had some ongoing discussions, and working with Amy, she's sort of bouncing around the idea that there might be another 30,000 before the end of the year, just with the increase in having the ice in and hydro costs and that sort of thing. But certainly she's made every effort to reduce some of the expenses going forward in the fact that we've also have reduced revenues. I'm going to take you back though to the estimated penalty and interest reduction. And that would be around $70,000 that we're estimating that we have not been charging to the ratepayers who have been have deferred their payments at this point in time to us. We haven't been applying that, and that estimate actually is to the end of the year. So we hope that we're able to.
Fran, we lost your audio. Not sure what happened. Fran, you appear to be on mute. No.
Oh, there's that better?
There we go.
Oh, I don't know what happened. Sorry about that. Where did I leave off? Anyway, we're anticipating $70,000 worth of reduction in penalty and interest revenues to the end of the year. And one of the things I just like to point out at this time too, which I haven't included in this report because it's not deemed to be COVID related, is the fact that some of our investments have not been performing in the same manner as they did last year. This is just an economic change. However, we have the benefit of having substantial increases in our supplemental taxes, and we haven't been experiencing the anticipated write-offs that we're going to have. So we feel that we're ahead of the game there. At this point in time, when we look at the whole of the organization, we do not anticipate that we will be expending more than what the province has provided us, and therefore will not be making application for phase 2. I have talked to my colleagues in other municipalities, and actually Becky was on the municipal finance officers web on Friday, and there seems like the larger municipalities with transit systems are going to be making those applications, but not a lot of us as smaller municipalities will be doing that. We'll find that the amount that the province has provided us based on population, we feel will cover our costs for the time. And nobody not knowing when things will become back to more of a normal state. Possibly there might be something more that the province will come through if this persists for a longer duration than anticipated.
Thanks, councillors. Questions about this report? Okay, we're not seeing anything. So I have a resolution for consideration that reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth receive the staff report entitled Financial Impact COVID Response for Information. Councillor Seiler, can I call on you to serve as our mover for that?
I will move that. Thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Andreessen, will you serve as our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Councillor Rothwell?
Thanks very much, Mayor Todd. My typing wasn't fast enough to get my question through to Fran. So Fran, thanks for the report. I had a couple of questions for you. Just on the table on the budget remaining, there's a few odd figures in there. Could you explain those for us, please? The few odd figures dealing under environmental services with 1,676% of budget remaining. as well as Public Works with 149% of budget remaining. Thank you.
With regard to, through you, with regard to those percentages, some of them weren't just translating across the way they should be. And so I'll ask that we redo that and send that one out to you just to be clear as to what those percentages are indicating. And notice the bottom one isn't quite right either. So we'll rehash those and reissue to council.
Good. Thank you very much. It's important to get an accurate reflection, but I appreciate the report. Thank you.
Councillor Andreessen?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Todd. I also had trouble getting a comment in before fast enough. I was just wondering if I could make a comment through you, Mayor Todd.
So this is not about the current item, but the last item?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just I'm just having some concerns. I've spoken about carryover in the past, and I know we're coming into budget talks again, and I just want to notice and thank Fran for, being explicit in these charts. It does show considerable carryover in some of the departments, and our taxpayers are providing funding each year for us to use. And when we have a fair bit of carryover with these projects, we're not using their funding in that current year. And it's a real challenge when we find ourselves, in the midst of perhaps raising taxes, and yet we're not utilizing the current funding at the time. So I again just want to have this top of mind as we kind of look to budget times ahead. I think we need to think about how we dedicate and allocate those funds, and where we have some huge carryover, maybe we need to monitor that and make decisions regarding allocating more money in those areas if there is already a lot of carryover. So just something to think about, and something I was reflecting on when I was taking a look at those charts. Thank you.
So I'll offer a brief comment on that. Of course, it's easy to acknowledge that taxpayer funds are collected in the current year for projects that are projected. And of course, sometimes those projects are inherently 2 or 3 year projects. Sometimes they're intended for the current year, but because of changes of circumstance in the current year, they will be executed in the next year. And so that accrual process of sort of moving that money across the annual boundaries is not atypical, I believe, for municipalities in terms of how they manage those kinds of projects. It allows for that flexibility, even though there are times when you wish that everything got done. Sometimes it's not going to. I certainly worked in an organization, and where I don't want to go, I suppose, as in terms of my comments, is I certainly worked for an organization where it was spend it or lose it. And you'd have this frenzy in December and November, late November and December, where people would go nuts spending money just because they had it, and they spent it on all kinds of things, often which were of questionable judgment. And so this accrual process that allows us to move money across the boundary of the year and remain committed to a project, I think is an important concept, because it sort of gets us away from that sort of feeding frenzy that can happen at the end of the year if you have a spend it or lose it policy. And while I agree in principle that excessive carryover is concerning because it reflects, or it could reflect, unfortunate circumstances in the market or overly ambitious plans. At the same time, I would be loath to move to a spend it or lose it approach and reconsideration of projects that council genuinely believes are important. And a lot of that carryover does tend to happen with capital projects. So those are sort of my observations. I too have been interested in, and had to learn quite a bit about how this works, and happy to sort of comment on it in the context of us desperately needing to avoid the spend it or lose it mentality. Treasurer Hale, do you have anything to add to this one?
yes, I would agree with both perspectives, and I think that it's a matter of doing the analysis to see why it was that we were under or over. I think good management decisions should be made, and you know, whether it's that you go over or stay under, and as long as we make good management decisions, but certainly, as Councillor Andreessen has pointed out, if we're taking too much, that's not our objective. If we're taking too little, but there should be a little bit of flexibility from year to year, so that good management decisions can be made. A budget is a budget, and it's just an estimate of where we go. And if there's an excellent sale on tires, we should take advantage of it. If the price has gone up, then we're going to just maybe hold off and get them next year. I'm belittling the overall, but as Councillor Andreessen said, though, if we continue to have that ongoing surplus, then that certainly isn't our intent.
Thanks. Councillor Andreessen, yeah, I guess a supplemental.
Yeah, I just want to say that the intentions of my comments are more around what Fran, what was meant, that just not to the intent of course, encouraging spending to the end of the year and frivolous spending at all. It's more about just being really careful about what we are carrying over and making really good decisions about prioritizing our needs and looking at what can be done in the time frame that we have. Just being cautious around that for sure. Thank you.
Thanks. I agree. I think that we all have that aspiration that wisdom is used in what happens, as we've heard from time to time, and especially with this year, there's been sort of incursions into the project plans created by COVID that we've had to address, the lack of availability of various supplies and so forth. So that is affecting. I'm actually have to admit to being quite impressed with how much has been achieved in the operating spend and the project spend this year. Given the pandemic, given the uncertainty of late March and April, and even parts of May, it's quite remarkable that we've gotten as much done as we have. So we do have a standing motion on the floor with regards to receipt of the report about COVID response. Any further questions about this matter? Okay, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. We have no reports tonight from our managers of environmental services and operations. Further, we have no reports from our fire chief tonight. So they're all doing good work, I can assure you that. That brings us to item 6 on our agenda. For item 6.1, councillors, are there any reports you would like to ask of staff or our committees? Again, you can direct this to the clerk's attention and we'll call on that in speaking order. Councillor Seiler.
Yes, Mayor Todd. My question is, now that November's closing in on us, I know I've had a few of my neighbors call me this weekend about our Albert Street drain project. Whereabouts does it stand right now?
Thank you, Councillor Seiler. I don't know if Mr. Couch is here tonight, but perhaps the CAO has some comments.
I don't know specifically whether I'm planning on starting and stopping this fall, but I can have somebody from Public Works get back to you. Lyndon, Mr. Couch is on holidays, but I think I can get an answer from other Public Works staff tomorrow, and I'll circulate that to all members of council.
Thanks, Councillor Seiler. Anyone else? Clerk Bergfeld's under item 6. Okay, so next up then on item 7, and we're turning to item 7, Council. We have received one item of correspondence that staff has advised warrants further action. For item 7.1, we have a request from the Salvation Army to permit the closing of a road for the purpose of distributing Christmas hampers. Dates affected here are December 21st and 22nd. I have a draft resolution for that effect based on the correspondence that reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth approve the request from the Salvation Army to close Maitland Avenue North from Palace Street to Elizabeth Street from Monday, December 21st at noon until Tuesday, December 22nd at 8 p.m. for the distribution of Christmas hampers. Can I call on Councillor Anstett to be our mover for that one?
Yes, I would move that. Thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Behrens, will you serve as seconder?
Yes, I will second that motion.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate on this matter? Request for more information? Okay, looks like folks are satisfied. Let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. Item 8 on our agenda allows council to consider and enact bylaws. We have no further bylaw proposals dedicated to this section of the agenda tonight. That brings us to item 9 on our agenda. Are there any notices of motion from councillors participating tonight? Okay, not seeing anything. That brings us to item 10 on our agenda. For item 10.1, are there any announcements that would be of benefit to our community or that reflect well on North Perth at this time? If you need to speak, just indicate in the chat window to the clerk. Okay, Ms. Gangle. Amy, your audio is not good. Something wrong with your microphone.
How about that?
That's better.
Sorry. Just recent information that's come through the Atwood Witches Walk has converted to a COVID-safe drive-through this year. So just wanted to let council know that. We've shared information on COVID safety as well as the Huron Perth Public Health Unit guidelines.
Thank you. Anyone else have announcements of benefit to the community? Councillor Rothwell.
Thanks very much, Mayor Todd. I have the pleasure to sit on the Elma Logan Arena and Park Committee. And at our last meeting we had this week, we had the privilege of having a tour of the both the new library in Moncton as well as the early on center and daycare center. And I think staff have done a wonderful job. It's a fantastic asset to the community. And perhaps I could suggest maybe a virtual tour could be arranged for those that would like to see the inside. I know certain tours are being arranged from time to time, but I think it's a fantastic opportunity or a fantastic asset into the Moncton community. And hats off to our staff that oversaw. Pat gave us a tour as well as our chief librarian. She also did a great job as well. So thanks very much to our staff, and I look forward to some sort of virtual tour that the rest of the public can see it at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rothwell. I too, and I know the Deputy Mayor got to have a tour, and we enjoyed, relished, in fact, the experience of that new facility. I think it's very important for the reinvigoration, if you will, of Moncton. It's a very beautiful, well-blended facility. You'd hardly know that it was just added on in some ways. It was just so seamless. So congratulations to all. Very well done job, and certainly brings to life some of the hopes and aspirations of our community, which is exciting. Any other announcements, Clerk Fairfax? Okay. That brings us to agenda item number 11. We have one matter before us to be considered in a closed session of council tonight. I have the resolution here that explains and enables our action. to enter closed session. So here it is, that this committee proceed in camera at 9:04 p.m. to address a matter pertaining to personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, regarding Perth Meadows residences. Can I call on Councillor Duncan to be our mover for this?
I will move that.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor Callum, will you serve as the seconder?
Yes, I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Let's have that motion. Vote. That is carried. So this council is temporarily adjourned out of public session. We invite councillors to stay on. We invite any invited staff that have been instructed to be on this call to remain. All other staff who are not expected to be here and any delegates are asked to remove themselves from the call at this time. For those remaining on, our IT guy is Super Simon. He's going to fix things here for us. And we'll be in closed session momentarily. So hang on. And your camera. And I think we're back. That brings us back in session. I need someone to test that the YouTube feed is functioning properly. Can we get an indication of that? Councillor Richardson, you're usually pretty good at whipping up YouTube for us. Can you test to see whether YouTube is transmitting? We're good to go. All right, thanks. All right, with regards to our closed session, council has nothing to report back to the community in open session related to its business. That brings us to item 13 on our agenda. Council, as a mandated good practice, acts near the end of its meeting agenda to confirm all of its actions and business of its meeting through what is called the Confirmatory Bylaw. I have a draft for that reads as follows. Bylaw number 155-2020 being a bylaw to generally confirm generally, I get the order right, previous actions of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed, and the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk, and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Can I call on Councillor, let's see here, Councillor Anstead to be our mover for this one?
Yes, I would move that.
Thank you. And Councillor Duncan, I believe you're eligible as a seconder.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Noting that some councillors will not be voting in this, I believe. Any discussion or debate on this one? Seeing none, let's have that vote. We don't have electronic voting for this. Okay, so are there any opposed? Thank you. Seeing none, we'll call that carried. Thank you. And councillors, we've hit that magic hour. We've completed deliberation and taken action on all the business that did come before us tonight. Before I read a motion to adjourn, is there any further business? Seeing no indication of that, I have a resolution that reads as follows. That the council meeting adjourns at 9:23 p.m. to meet again for general council business on Monday, November 2nd, 2020 at 7 p.m. Can I call on Councillor Behrens as our mover?
Yes, I will move that motion.
Thank you. And Councillor Andreessen, will you serve as the seconder for that?
Yes, I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Are there any opposed? That motion is carried. Council, we are adjourned. Thank you for another interesting meeting, and we will meet again in November on November 2nd.